Well, what a pleasure to be here with you. Let me particularly welcome the students and say that you're the reason why we're here. You are the main actors, and we're only here as the supporting actors. This college is about you, about your future, and we hope that by your spending 4 years in Morningside College, that you'll make a difference, that you'll lead a richer, more fulfilling life. So I was asked by Nancy to say something to you all tonight, and I thought, gee, what am I going to say? I figured you're all here in university trying to acquire knowledge. So I thought of entitling my talk, Knowledge and Epistemology. And ask questions like, what is knowledge? And I was in Boston, and I tested on some friends. I said, what is knowledge? One guy said to me something about a series of network connections and neurons firing at different frequencies. I said, well, this is hopeless. Let's try to say something else. But nevertheless, you know, you're here at university, and knowledge is the main reason why you're here. So I would still like to say something about knowledge, but try not to be as abstract, but to say something that's relevant to you, and hopefully will provide some guidance as to how you should think about your next 4 years, and how you should spend your next 4 years, what you should do. These are just thoughts which I hope will be helpful to you. So I entitled the talk, The Knowledge Enterprise, to try to cover a number of areas having to do with knowledge. How do I change the slides? I'll tell you, I'm technically challenged, and in spite of my degrees in engineering, it's a disgrace to the profession to call me an engineer. Now, you all are really in the golden age of knowledge. I don't need to tell you about the explosion of knowledge. If you just look at any data, the last I saw was that there are now 3 million articles on Wikipedia. That's a lot of stuff. And not only is there an explosive growth in the amount or the quantity of knowledge, but also the rate at which knowledge is being produced, or the generation of new knowledge is also accelerating. If you look at those curves, whether it be a number of books, number of articles published, they're all exponentially taking off. So that's wonderful. This is the golden age of knowledge. And knowledge has become very readily accessible, largely due to the internet. You can get on the internet nowadays and you find out anything, right? I'm amazed at what people put on the internet and how many well-meaning people, they're so kind to put all kinds of things on the internet. There's almost no need to buy textbooks. So how do we deal with knowledge, and what does knowledge mean, you know, in this sort of day and age? I did tell you technically challenged. There we go. Now, with this explosion or explosive increase in the amount of knowledge, knowledge therefore has to be compartmentalized, and these are compartmentalized according to disciplines. It's necessary that there be such compartmentalization. Otherwise, it will be intractable, nor will knowledge be as readily accessible when you need it. So compartmentalization is in and of itself not necessarily a bad thing. I say it's necessary. And broadly speaking, all sort of people in higher education agree that human knowledge is divided into 3 categories: the natural sciences, the social sciences, and the humanities. I'd like you to remember that, because as you go through your next 4 years, I submit that you should have adequate exposure to each of these 3 areas of human knowledge. The natural sciences, of course, deal with, natural phenomena, the likes of physics, chemistry. I would also put the life sciences into that category. The social sciences are what deals with, how human society is organized. It could be sociology, political science, psychology, economics. That would be, what's called social science. And then the humanities would be really, I think that's a fantastic term, because at the core of it, humanity really tells you what it is to be human. Subjects such as history of English, literature, art, which are expressions, or human expressions in aesthetics. That's humanities. Now, these three categories of knowledge, or these three areas of knowledge, they deal with different subject matters. They, in fact, have their own language. They differ in language and in semantics. What one word may mean to a natural or to a physicist may not mean the same thing. The same word, may not mean the same thing to a humanist. They differ in methodology, and I'm very big on methodology. If you master methodology, you can go through life, learning a lot of things and learning it very efficiently. So the natural sciences have the scientific method, which have been developed over time. The social sciences have their kind of methodology, and as well as the humanities. Now, these three areas also differ in their sources of evidence, in their temporal relevance. By that I mean, one tends to think of the physical sciences as being truth, and truth transcends time. I will tell you that certainly in the life sciences, I find that not to be true. What was held to be truth, turned out to be superseded, by further truth. Not that what was known was negated, but certainly that was not all there was to the story. I can still remember, in the 1950s, not that I'm that old, but when DNA, when the structure of DNA was discovered, people thought, gosh, we got life figured out. That was known as the central dogma of biology, and everything is encoded in DNA, and then transcribed to RNA, and translated into proteins. Then people found out not necessarily, it could be reverse transcription. Information can be, encoded in RNA, and in fact, now we have, all this siRNA, for which a couple of people got a Nobel Prize a few years ago. Not that it was wrong, to say that genetic information is coded in DNA and then transcribed to RNA. That's still true, but that's not all there is to the story. So my point is the physical sciences, a lot of people say, or the natural sciences, people say, oh, they're eternal, they're timeless. I find that not necessarily the case. With the social sciences, certainly, social sciences tend to be more placed in the context of a particular time, so their temporal relevance tend to be particular to a certain historic period. But what I find ironic is that I think the humanities are the most timeless, because at the end it deals with man. And as long as we are all human beings, cultures may change and cultural norms and sensitivities may change. At the end, we're all human beings. I look back and ask myself, would you read a scientific paper that is 30 years old? Probably not. It's probably not very interesting and not very useful. But why would we still read literature that's 300 years old? And still find that to be very interesting and relevant, and still tells us and still speaks to us. You read Shakespeare today, it still speaks to you. So rather than thinking, that the natural sciences are the most timeless and eternal, I rather to say that the humanities are the most timeless and most eternal. So the pressure today is for people to specialize. I just had a conversation with this gentleman here from Hubei. But I will, and he's telling me that he wants to study business, and I told him that my honest advice to you is don't just study business. You have plenty of time to study business, you do MBA. Why do you want to study business? An undergraduate, if you were to do your MBA, you'll do it all over again. And moreover, I said, I don't think the better business schools view applicants with an undergraduate business background very favorably. I much rather, that you major in philosophy, psychology, or something else, or even art history. And I think he was rather shocked by what I said. I had to say it a few times, and I don't think it has sunken in, so we'll have dinner again. I will pass on the same message to you and try harder to brainwash you. People said to me, because I'm engaged in business and people say, oh, you went to Harvard, you must have gone to Harvard Business School. I said, would I stoop so low as to go to a trade school? I certainly wouldn't do that. That's not for me. Anyway, I strongly encourage you, in your next 4 years, to try to avail yourself to different areas, or in this totality of human knowledge, and broadly categorizing into these 3 categories to avail yourself of some exposure to each of these 3 areas. Don't underestimate the humanities, and I will get to that. The pressure is to specialize, but these next 4 years you should build a broad base. There's no hurry to specialize. By the way, all this business stuff, marketing and accounting, I guarantee you, as smart as you guys are, go to the bookstore, buy a few books, you'll learn it all. Then he asked me, well, how come there's so many business schools, in the world? Why are all these people, going to business school? And they're all suckers. All right. Now, this next slide, I call it the loss of innocence. There was a period, when people engaged in knowledge, the acquisition or the transmission of knowledge, meaning, doing research and teaching, people were sort of above, any personal interest, economic interest, commercial interest. That was the age of innocence. But that, I'm afraid, is an age of a bygone era. The whole knowledge business has lost its innocence, and mainly it's because people now find out their economic values attributable to knowledge. Now, from the very beginning, people used to study for the sake of studying. So it was knowledge for its own sake. At the end, the talk, I have prepared a list of books which I recommend to you guys. I'm not requiring that you read them all, but I really prepare a list of books which I really think it's important you guys read books. There's a book, a very seminal work in defining what is a university, and that was written about 150 years ago by a man named John Henry Newman, who was a Catholic cardinal. And the name of the book is The Idea of a University. In it is a chapter named that knowledge is an end to itself. That was the age of innocence, when knowledge was an end to itself. Now, later on, during the Enlightenment, some of the scientists, in fact, many of the scientists, including Isaac Newton, they were people that would be called deists, meaning that they believe, God created the universe, and then, walk away, and that we human beings are left to discover, what God had created in this wonderful world that God has created, and that was a motivation for them to understand or discover, nature. Now, So from knowledge for its own sake to knowledge is power. Now that phrase was coined by none other than Francis Bacon. He was the one that first saw the utilitarian value, to knowledge, and said, knowledge is power. But I'm afraid today, well, at that time, of course, power meant, I don't mean power like dominating other people, but mainly in control of nature, But today, I'm afraid, the more appropriate term is to say knowledge is money. So at the end, I'm afraid too much of even in this knowledge enterprise, the criterion for evaluation is one that is financial. That's why, today we have intellectual property. And intellectual property have rights, and these rights are protected by laws. In the old days, they were just real properties, meaning, like we're in the real estate business. So plants, land, building, farms, equipment, machines, these are real assets. But today, you have intellectual property or IP. You have a bright idea, and you go patent it. You file a patent. And that is considered property in the sense that you have ownership of it, and nobody can infringe on your ownership, and that there is economic value attached to it. So this whole, notion of intellectual property, in addition to real property, came to being as the knowledge enterprise lost its innocence. And then I would say, for those that have been in the research field, once there is economic value attributed to knowledge, that became a real impedance, to the free exchange of knowledge. In the old days, when I was still working in a lab, as a graduate student, as a postdoc, you just collaborated with people. Someone else, in another university, working on a similar topic as you are, and you go to meetings, you talk, and say, why don't we do an experiment together? And you send me some of your cell line, or I'll send you, some of my proteins. But I'm afraid today, you can't do that anymore. You want to use my cell line? My university is going to send you what's called a material transfer agreement, or MTA, which stipulates that if you, invents anything or comes up with anything which has intellectual property value to it, I'm going to get a share of that. And then once you have these contracts, then you have to have lawyers. Oh gosh, I try, in some instances, to work with others, for scientific investigation, and for months and months and months, we just couldn't get the MTA worked out. And at the end, the experiments were never done. So this loss of innocence of knowledge, really has impeded the free exchange of knowledge. Then finally, there is the segregation now of knowledge that is deemed to have economic value and knowledge which are not deemed or is not deemed to have any potential economic value. That is why, the humanities have been in decline, for a long time, decades now. You don't find universities building new buildings, for the English department or the history department, right? But all the new buildings are engineering, molecular biology, medical school, well, I'm afraid part of the reason is that these are the area of knowledge where there's economic value or potential economic value. So that is kind of sad. As long as there's money, there are people who will flock, to money. So like flies come around, find people. And then in time you have an industry. So this is what I call the knowledge industry. consisting of all the people, who are engaged in business to some extent, with a profit motive. It's very expensive, to generate new knowledge now, considering, especially engineering or physics or chemistry or the biomedical sciences. It's very expensive, to do experiments. So somebody has to foot the bill. Oftentimes it's the public sector, of society that will, come up with the money to fund research. And society nowadays also has become sufficiently commercially minded that even society at large demands some return on investment for its support, of scientific research. So that is why you look at the policy, the funding policies of many countries. China, for example, the funding policy tends to be very application-oriented. I'll talk more about that later. But underlying all of that is that people want to extract economic value, out of knowledge. I say that the academic-industrial complex has replaced the military-industrial complex of the post-World War II era. Now, what's called the military-industrial complex, that term was coined by President Eisenhower when he left office. In the farewell speech, he coined this term and warned the country that the country will go down this road and forming this huge military-industrial complex. And indeed, that was what happened, during the Cold War era. But in retrospect, that really wasn't a bad thing because that funded a lot of scientific research. Many of that eventually, led to very useful civilian use. But today, rather than this military-industrial complex, it's an academic-industrial complex. That border between academia and the commercial world has become very porous. In fact, there are people that go back and forth. In the old days, it was unthinkable, that somebody from industry would come back and teach, in university. It's possible, for people to leave university to go to industry. But I tell you, my friend, with whom I had a drink a couple of weeks ago in Boston, she started out as an assistant professor in biology at Harvard, and then left and worked for a biotech company, and came up with a few drugs, and now she is back at Harvard teaching. I think that's very interesting. So that boundary between what's academic and what's industrial, that's become very porous. In fact, universities have really become economic engines. In the so-called knowledge economy, the real engine to that economy is very much with the universities. And the universities themselves have become financial powerhouses. You look at Harvard University, its endowment today stands at $27 billion. That's a lot of money, 27 billion. That's US dollars, It's recovered some, at the height of it, it was like $35 billion. That's a lot of money. And then, once again, not only are the fields of study which are deemed not to have economic value have declined, but also ones which are deemed to have no use to the whole endeavor of making money. Those also have declined. And I've given the example of ethics. If you are an ethics professor and you teach in the philosophy department, your economic value is probably not very high. But now the business schools have discovered, we need ethics. If you were an ethics professor in a business school, your value, your economic value is a lot higher. And then, of course, we have bioethics. So you could be an ethicist, in a medical school, and I guarantee you your economic value is higher than if you were to teach ethics in a philosophy department. So what is ethics in this case? It is field of study that has been hijacked, to serve the interest of making money. So what's called translational research, and that is to translate knowledge into technological innovation. This is a buzzword today, What used to be called applied research, today is called translational research. And if you are in America, you write grants, to the NIH, you got to say, I'm doing translational research, otherwise you just won't get funded. Because the granting agencies, they're just getting more and more impatient. I want to see some benefit, to society. So if you say, I'm translating something, in fact, the NIH has a whole roadmap, for translational research. Has that gone too far? I think there's a real danger of that. But nevertheless, that's a way to realize the economic value of knowledge. But to do translational research, really requires people of different temperament and different skill set than for people to do pure research. So as you think about, I said, Boston, this lady who is going to be studying the life sciences, right? Well, think about this, what kind of skill set do you want to acquire and what kind of temperament do you have, whether it's more suited for pure research or translational research. The two activities, in fact, would best be done by two different kinds of people. Now, the point I want to say to you is we don't know a priori, what knowledge will be translatable. What is useful knowledge and what is not? We do not know a priori. And that is why I'm a big supporter of what's called purely curiosity-driven research, or what's otherwise called blue sky research. I'd like to give you one example. There's a company that I invested in Boston. And it was started by this professor of bioengineering. And he started some 2 years ago being interested in spider silk. There are two creatures in nature that make silk. One is spider, one is a silkworm. On a per unit cross-section basis, silk is stronger than steel. And so he got very interested, in silk. Why does silk have such, high tensile strength? And for 20 years, he worked on silk, spider silk, and then silkworm silk. Now you got to hand it, to some people, whether it be the NIH or whatever foundation that supported his research for 20 years. If you're short-sighted and demanding immediate payback to knowledge, why would you support somebody, studying silk? That seems so useless. Well, then he had a younger junior faculty member in his department who was a football player. And playing football, he tore his ACL, which is a tendon right here. Yeah? It sort of ties your two bones together. And he tore his ACL. And he started thinking about, right now, tendons cannot regenerate. So you have to do 2 cuts or 2 surgeries, taking a tendon from somewhere else to repair, or to replace, the tendon that's torn. So he said, why couldn't we use silk? If silk is so strong, why couldn't we use silk? And then he started working on this problem of using silk and braiding silk into a ribbon. And instead of, doing 2 cuts of surgery, or sometimes, they take these ligaments from cadavers, and of course there's all kinds of problems, So why don't we do it with silk? And we did experiments, and we started a company together. We tried with goats. It turns out the knees of goats are very good model for the knees of human beings. And we got permission from the FDA to go into human trial. And so what happened was, rather than taking another tendon from somewhere else, or a ligament from somewhere else, so the surgeon simply, punch 2 holes, take out the ACL that's damaged, take this silk, ribbon, drill 2 holes, tie your 2 bones together. That's it. And the silk is treated in such a way that it has certain surface properties, that it attracts fibroblasts to come and sit there and secrete collagen. And in time, collagen is what regenerates, another new ACL. And we then got permission to go to Germany and get it into humans. And we put it into 10 patients. And some of them, we screw up, the anchoring, of the silk, on the bones, and they got loose. So we had to explant, what was implanted. And that gave us the opportunity to look at what's implanted. It looked beautiful. It looks like a real regeneration of the new ACL. Now, all of this came out of, some guy, 20 years ago who was interested in spider silk. Now, moreover, on the side, he said, well, silk is a very interesting material. We can formulate silk into a gel, and because silk is not immunogenic, so you don't make antibodies, to reject it. And he said, these ladies, that have wrinkles, rather than giving them Botox, why don't we inject some silk under their skin, and they'll make the wrinkles go away, and in time, the silk will be resorbed, and then we'll give them some more silk. They'll come back, and we'll charge them one more time for another injection, and we started formulating this silk, into this gel. Well, this company came along, a very big company, said we like this. We like, biological products for cosmetic use. And then we talked, and make a long story short, they pay us $70 million US cash, for this formulation of silk. We hadn't done a single experiment. We hadn't injected it into humans. They just loved the idea, and they gave us $70 million. That's where I'm getting the money to support my psychology. Right? My point is this: we have no a priori knowledge that working on silk will lead to $17 million. And if our silk ACL really works out, there may be another $17 million down the road. So you just don't know. I think knowledge still has to be pursued for knowledge's sake. And I hope you all would think about this in the next 4 years. Don't just pursue what you think is useful. Back to my friend here. Don't think, marketing and accounting, all that. Well, you can learn that through your eyes, I suppose. Indulge yourself, in some blue sky, curiosity-driven pursuit of knowledge, and you just don't know, something really good may come out of it. Now, I'm going to say a few things about, how these 3 players in the knowledge enterprise have changed, over time. The professor, the student, and the university. I should keep this short. This is derogatory to professors. Professors used to be real scholars and teachers, and that was about it. Researchers. That's it. But today, professors are many things. And they wear many hats. Many of them are entrepreneurs, they're consultants, they're commentators, like social commentators, they're company founders, and moreover, they're celebrities. Why not? Whoever would have thought, that chef would become celebrity, right? How many of you watch the Food Channel? Right? you know Gordon Ramsay, right? Celebrity chef. Whoever thought, you know, being a chef you could be a celebrity? Well, if chefs can be celebrity, why not professors? So I'll tell you that many of my friends who are professors, they live like celebrity. Their lifestyle is like a rock star. You know, instead of rock stars going around giving concerts, you know, they go around giving lectures. That's why I say lectures are really now a form of entertainment. That's why I really admire you guys. You know, for the next 4 years, you get to sit and listen to these lectures. I'd rather do that, you know, than to watch the television. I just think it's a great form of entertainment. By the way, you know, there is now this trend for retirees, you know, to go live around college towns so that they can go and listen to lectures, you know, and sort of sail into the sunset. So lectures are real entertainment. And the professors really run an independent knowledge franchise. You know, they have to raise money, you know, they have to build process, they have to churn out products, you know, which are students and papers, and then I would say they are the public intellectuals, you know, that have left the ivory tower and gone into either the corridors of power or the arena of public opinion. For example, you look at the US, we have a Secretary of Energy who's a Nobel laureate in physics, right? And we have countless number of economic advisors to the president, you know, who had previously been professors, and then probably after they finish their service in Washington, they go back to being a professor. The former president of Harvard, you know, he's today an economics professor, is again, you know, being an economic advisor to President Obama. So on and so forth. You know, you read the New York Times, you know, you have a column by Paul Krugman, you know, who won the Nobel Prize in economics. So these are what I call public intellectuals, and they have now brought the knowledge to the public in a much broader arena, and they become people who can influence public opinion. Now the students, you guys. I must say the proliferation of university graduates have led to a loss of scarcity value. I'm sorry, guys. 4 years from now, you'll leave here with a bachelor's degree, but a bachelor's degree no longer has the scarcity value, you know, as in the old days. I reckon, you know, 50 years ago, at the time of the founding of the People's Republic of China, in all of China, there were probably 100,000 university students. I reckon that, and I think that's not far from the truth. And in those days, being a university graduate was a big deal. Probably around the same time after World War II, no more than 5% of college graduates in the UK went off to university. But today, in Hong Kong, I think 30, maybe a third of the high school graduates go on to university. That's not counting the ones who go abroad for tertiary education. In America or the UK, it probably is more like 60%. So there's no longer that scarcity value. Now the cost of higher education is very expensive, and many students are now graduating with a load of debt, financial debt on their back. And I understand, you know, that creates the urgency, you know, for them to get a job, you know, so that you have to acquire job skills so you can pay off your student loans. And that, therefore, there's a pressure, you know, for them to go into fields, you know, with good earnings potential. Now, in the old days, it used to be that if you had gone to university, at least actuarially speaking, your lifetime earning is higher than if you had not gone to university. And in fact, a few weeks ago in the UK, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Lib Dem guy, proposed that maybe we should impose a tax on university graduates. Because all universities in the UK are public universities. And assuming that you had gone to university and therefore you have a higher lifetime earning, well, you should give some of that back. So he was talking about, you know, a new tax for university graduates, you know, that will follow them for quite some time, you know, for the rest of their life. Well, And unfortunately, that association of university education and higher earning power has been weakened. It is not clear to me at all, that that is necessarily true. Now, of course, that also has to do with stratification, of the quality of higher education that you're getting. But I do see, that even in China, there are loads of university graduates not being able to get jobs, and therefore now some parents are saying, if my son or daughter can only get into a fairly low-end university, why bother? Might as well go to vocational school, and this job prospect and earnings power will even be better. Now, of course, that's not true if you graduate from Morningstar. You'll be so sought after. They'll be lining up, to recruit you. Believe me. Now, the university. The university is a very different place. I don't know, before you came here 4 weeks ago, what was your notion? You probably had some very romantic notion of what university is like. Tonight, I'm afraid I'm going to give you some more cynical view. Higher education is now very subject, to the marketplace. What Jim was earlier saying about the planning committee, or the market committee. I don't know what you guys call it. That hey, the market is held, in a position of sanctity, in a place like Hong Kong. So is higher education now, subjected, to the market forces of supply and demand. Universities are run as commercial enterprises now. Now, much of what I said, or what I'm saying now, pertain perhaps largely to American universities. That's where I live most of the time. So it may not be true at CUHK, but nevertheless, many of the universities, they have a finance department, that raise money, they get tuition, they get royalty income, they have marketing department, they go out and try to, reach students and recruit better students. They do sales, which is, to get the students to sign on the bottom line and say that I'll be here for the next 4 years. Strategy, product positioning, consumer experience, value for money, creature comfort. If you look at the new buildings being built on American campuses today, they're like 5-star hotels. Why? Because they got to please the students. Because otherwise, especially some of the lesser universities in competitive markets, the students won't come. So the new dormitories are, like really luxury hotels. And the university administration people, they're getting paid very handsomely. If you look at Ivy League schools, do you have any idea what these Ivy League school universities presidents make? I won't ask Professor Song. Well, I believe the president of Brown University makes something like $700,000 US a year. And these are all public figures. And that's before, the other income she gets from sitting on the boards, of corporations. Because if you are, president of a prestigious university, you're invited to sit on boards, of big companies. So these university presidents are now making upwards of $1 or even $2 million a year. They're getting paid very, very handsomely. That is to say, the university nowadays are increasingly, morphing into commercial entities. Now, university is really a brand. Why do people buy Prada or Louis Vuitton? It's a brand. It's not that that bag is any better, than the fake. but it's a brand. And in fact, why do people fake it? Because it's the brand. If it wasn't a brand, nobody would bother to fake it, right? And for universities, the brand image, if it ever deteriorates or changes, both upward and downward, they change very, very slowly. They're very resilient to adversity. So my point is this. When you graduate from here and you say, I have a degree from CUHK, You say, what college are you from? Morningside. That's a brand. And when you have that brand on you, that's a lot of brand value there. I know that because people say, oh, what did you do? I went to Harvard. People say, oh, you must be smart. Until you prove yourself dumb, then you assume smart. It's a brand, right? So I'm very happy to tell you, that you guys, you won the lottery or whatever reason, you're here at Morningside, you're at CUHK. It's a good brand. CUHK is a good brand. And Morningside is even a better brand. So when you guys leave here, you will wear this brand with you, and it will be worth a lot of money. So it's good. Maybe I should keep moving on. I'm painting too bleak a picture, too cynical a picture. I'm corrupting these young minds. Now, let me talk about the changing pedagogy of student evaluation. My point here is that in the old days, the professor teaches something and you're supposed to regurgitate it. You'll be tested by recall of what the professor taught you. That is no longer, what matters. In fact, this type of what I call passive learning really doesn't work anymore. I guarantee you, that soon as you finish, a course, a final exam of a course, you probably, that instant, you forgot half of what was taught. And it decays exponentially. If you ask me today, what do I remember from my course, I don't. But it doesn't mean, I didn't benefit from it. But that benefit doesn't mean, you have the ability to recall, more knowledge. You are not a information storage device. And don't think of yourself as such. So don't just let professors, sort of dump information, just download stuff on your hard disk, hard drive. That's not what education is about. At least, at Morningside, that shouldn't be what education is about. What's called active learning, a good example is case study method. The Harvard Business School, that trade school, they teach only by case study method. There was one year, almost 15 or 20 years ago, I went around recruiting MBA graduates. And I went to Stanford, I went to Chicago, I went to Wharton, I went to Harvard. And I can tell you that I could tell qualitatively students which were taught by the case study method, they came out as a different product than students who were taught by lectures. Because when you do case study, you have to actively engage your thinking and your analysis, and what you get out of those cases, that is yours. And the benefit will have a much longer persistence than if you simply were spoon-fed, by lectures. I didn't, understand all of this. I remember when I was an undergraduate, I tried to sign up for a course in history. And I went to the first class and the professor doesn't lecture. And she said, here's a reading list, you guys, go home, read it, and then come back and we'll discuss it. I said, what is this? And then, she's just a lazy bum because she didn't want to lecture and she wanted us to do the work. I didn't understand, really, in retrospect, had I known that, that really was a much superior way of learning. So that's why the tutorial method, that is practiced in Oxford and Cambridge, that is a very, very good way of teaching. And we will try to include some of that, at the Morningside College level. Some of the schools have now gone to what's called problem-solving based learning, even the medical schools. Instead of giving lectures and memorizing, all this biochemistry, it's problem-solving. So if knowledge cannot be used to solve problems, what good is knowledge, right? This is quite contrary to the liberal arts tradition. There's one strand of thought which says that knowledge really should be for its own sake, and I think that really is outdated, and it's a bit snobbish. I think knowledge should be used what's important to therefore really, especially in this age, where information can be had, go on the internet, you can find anything. The real question, what is really important, is not one answer you give, but what questions you ask. If I were your teacher, let's say I give you a paper to read, I have no interest in asking you 5 questions and ask you to give me 5 answers. I will ask you, after reading the paper, you give me 5 questions. Ask 5 questions. You've read this paper. What are the questions? What do you question? What are the weaknesses, for example, in the results or the methods, or in the logic of this argument? Just giving answer today is not where it's at. Rather, it's what questions do you ask. And if I were your teacher, today I would ask you, to ask questions. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I would ask you, are you still learning? So this enduring love for learning, I think, is really a goal, of what teaching should be. As long as you love learning, I think you're set for the rest of your life. And that's how I will evaluate you. 5 years from now, today I would ask you, what are you reading outside of your coursework? Let me ask you this. How many of you this summer read a book? Pretty good. How many? I don't mean comics. How many of you read 2 books? Show your hands. How many of you read 3 books? Good. I would really encourage you guys to read books. I don't care what books you read. Read good books. I don't care whether it's literature or science or whatever. Read good books. Really read. Beyond mere knowledge. I mean, just having mere knowledge, as I said, just recall the fact that's pretty meaningless. It's about you. And back to my friend who it's not what they teach in business school. It's you. It's who you are. It's what kind of person you are. If you don't lay a good foundation for that, just learning that marketing strategy, all that accounting rules, that's pretty useless. That is the crux of the liberal arts tradition. It is about you. And we want to develop you as a person first. And if you're a proper person, I think you will deal with whatever you need to learn, in a much better way. And the potential of that knowledge being useful and helpful to you and for your future career development will be much bigger than if you were a shallow person really mastering some skills. I should move on. Now, I know you guys will ask me, some question about, how do I learn? Now, everybody learns differently. I can only tell you, say a few things to you about how I learn. So these are what I call my epistemic practices. You may learn differently, and that's perfectly okay. But I will tell you a few things about what I learn, or how I learn. How do you deal with the explosion of knowledge? There's so much to know. How do you deal with it? Well, the way I deal with it is not by memorizing more, but to go back to first principles. What do I mean by that? So somebody comes to me and say, I have this new molecule. It can do wonders. It can bind to this receptor and trigger this signaling pathway, and then all these wonderful genes will be turned on. Blah blah blah. All right. I would go to first principles. You tell me, that this molecule will bind to a receptor, on the surface of the cell. Well, I know the surface of the cell is negatively charged. What's the charge, of your molecule? Is it hydrophobic? Is it hydrophilic? These are very basic first principles. And if you master these first principles, you can look at any question and you will get to the right answer by asking the right questions. So these first principles are very, very important. You know, the first person who deduced the properties of DNA being the embodiment of genetic information was in fact a physicist. It was Erwin Schrödinger. And in 1944, he gave a series of lectures in Ireland and came out, you know, the lecture series called What It's Like. And in that series of lectures, he deduced from first principle what that molecule should be, which encodes, you know, information for life, which eventually, you know, turned out to DNA, and then 10 years later, you know, the double helix structure was solved by students or students of students. And, first principles. So it is not by memorizing more, but rather to understand first principles, basic fundamental principles, and apply those principles to any new situation that may arise. How do you give cognitive meaning to knowledge? You know, in this day and age where there's this knowledge explosion, knowledge has also lost meaning. You know, I read in the paper a few weeks ago, the whole genome for wheat has been solved, or sequenced. If I were to give you, you know, the wheat genome sequence, you know, which is a series of AGCTs, you know, a series of 4 letters, right? There's no meaning to it. How do you give meaning to knowledge? And by meaning, I mean cognitive meaning, because later on I'll talk about another kind of meaning. And my answer to that is context. I don't know, you know, if what I'm saying is meaningful to you today, but just remember what I say. The richer the context, the richer the meaning. And therefore, you should build a very broad knowledge base for yourself. It is in fact context, or in the context of that knowledge base, that everything will be given meaning. I know these terms, what I'm saying sounds very philosophical. Let me give a simple explanation. If you come to me and say, I'm 5'6", so what? What's the meaning of that? How do you give meaning to this, you know, knowledge that this boy is 5'6"? Well, if I knew the distribution of height of the population of Hong Kong people 18 years old, I knew what the mean was, and I knew what the standard deviation was, and then I put 5.6 right there. I know, this kid is 65 or 65th percentile. Now, that is meaning to 5'6". I know this guy is a little better than average, probably, you know, 1 standard deviation better. You know, not a tall guy, not a short guy, above average, right? You know, that's a very simple illustration. But you must have context to give meaning to any knowledge. And the richer is the context, the richer is the meaning of everything. I will tell you today, I'm a very avid reader. I read all kinds of things. I read the newspaper, I read several newspapers every day. I read history, I read literature. I do not read business books, even though I'm in business. I do not read business books. I just think those business books are a waste of time. I read philosophy, I read science, I still read scientific papers. Well, a lot of what I read, you know, at the moment, you know, may not immediately meaning to me, but that's all building that context so that when new knowledge comes, it maps into that knowledge base that I have, and immediately meaning is extracted from knowledge. So it is very important, my take-home message to you is to build that knowledge base. Now, how do you derive meaning? But in this case, I'm not talking about cognitive meaning, but existential meaning from knowledge. You know, sort of the meaning of your existence, you know, and my answer is to put it to this. If knowledge is not useful to you, you cannot do something with that knowledge. I'm not saying that that's no good, but the richer existential meaning really is derived from use of that knowledge. How do you analyze and solve problems? Well, I'm a scientist, and I tell you, reductionism, which is very fundamental to scientific method, and it's very, very important. How do you solve the problem? Somebody tells you, any problem, that bus stop is too congested. From 9 o'clock to 9:15 is too congested. How do you solve that problem? How do you solve the congestion problem? Right? Or the food here is not good. It's not good enough. Or it's too expensive. How do you solve that problem? Well, first thing I do is break it down. That's what reduction. You know what I mean by reductionism? Break it down. Break down the cost. If it's too expensive, break down the cost. There are too many buses there, break down the facts. Where are these buses coming from? Where are they going to? Who are the passengers? Why are they here? Break it down. But simply breaking it down is not good enough. All the parts which come from the breaking down must then be put or related to a whole as a framework. And that framework largely consists of relationships. And those relationships, for example, of causality, what is the cost, what is the result, for example, cost, benefit, risk, reward, these are relationships. If you can break down the problem and then put it back together in a framework of relationships, immediately I will tell you the solution, or a reasonable solution, even if it's not the optimal solution, will almost fall out by itself from that analysis. To me, one of the biggest benefit I've gotten from all the courses I've taken, Sean, is epidemiology. Absolutely. It's not any course from the business school. I was in the Harvard School of Public Health and I had to take epidemiology. Epidemiology is study of diseases, at the population level using statistical means. And for me, that epistemologically is probably the biggest benefit I've gotten because it helps me to think probabilistically, it helps me to think about causality, it helps me to think about confounding variables, with that, I think you can solve any problem. And then, how do you make judgment based on imperfect information? You'll never have all the information you want, and you'll still have to make judgment. The way I do it is by pattern recognition. Any problem, to buy or not to buy? Should I buy this computer or should I not buy that computer? I don't have, all the information, but I have pattern. A good computer should have these characteristics, and this computer has certain characteristics. How does that pattern fit, into the pattern of a good computer? And I look at companies all the time, or I look at technologies all the time. What is a good technology? What is a good company to invest in? Good companies have certain characteristics, certain patterns of properties. And by pattern recognition, that's how I make judgmental decisions, or judgment decisions based on imperfect information. I won't talk about machine learning, except I think the fun slide. The real problem is not whether machines think, but whether men do. Now, let me just finish with this. This I took from a document that was prepared for the World Bank, which advocates liberal arts education even for developing countries. And it listed 5 criteria of what liberal arts education should do for the students. After you leave here in 4 years, you should be able to think and write clearly. It is very important to be able to think clearly and to be able to write clearly. I would really encourage you, to practice, writing effectively, critically, and can communicate with precision, cogency, and force. I'm going to give you all these slides, so don't worry. It's yours. And you can, mull over them. Have a critical appreciation of the ways in which we gain knowledge and understand and understanding of the universe, of society, and of ourselves. has a broad knowledge of other cultures, other times, and is able to make decisions based on reference to the wider world and to the historic forces that have shaped it. Has some understanding of and experience in thinking systematically about moral and ethical problems, and then has achieved depth in some field of knowledge. So it's still important to have a major, as much as we're advocating a broad knowledge base. You still should have a major and learn something in greater depth. So my last slide is that we're a college here. I take this from Professor Merlees from the website of Morningside College, that a college is a community of people learning together, and we shall have much to learn each from the other. So this is a community of learning, and any community must have shared values. I know it's fashionable nowadays to talk about diversity, and I'm very happy to see diversity here. With our friend from Russia who had lived in UAE, that you single-handedly helped the diversity of this group. But diversity as a community, merely having diversity without having shared values, that community cannot exist, cannot persist, it will splinter. So there are certain shared values, which I think are very important to Morningside College, and as you go through your year, and living together and being with your tutors, I do believe these values will become clear to you. We advocate the tutorial method as a way of active teaching and active learning. We advocate service learning, which means, we invite you all to go do some service, not merely, going to your local Red Cross and have a desk job, but really, to go to some hardship areas. Today, I spent some time at the School of Public Health and heard some of the things they do. It's just absolutely phenomenal, about how this Emily Chan, unfortunately, she's also a tutor, of Morningside College, but unfortunately today her child is sick and she can't come. But she takes students, into these very remote areas in China and working with minority groups. And it may be, far away, where there are no medical facilities whatsoever. We think, that is important, not because we like to extract some cheap service out of you guys, but we think, for you to develop as a person, it's important to gain those perspectives. Finally, I would say, that we are really at the cutting edge. Yale just announced yesterday that it's going to form a liberal arts college in Singapore together with the National University of Singapore. And if you read, the press release, it sounds like they, just lifted a page from our book. What they want to do just the sort of things that we had said 5 years ago that that's what we want to do. So you're the first class of Morningside College. I'm so happy, that you guys are here. And I hope, that in these next 4 years, what Morningside College stands for will become internalized by you. That by the time you graduate from CUHK, you will be a certain kind of person that will carry on these values or live these values of Morningside College for the rest of your life, and you will undoubtedly make us proud. You will be the best ambassador of Morningside College, and I think it will be. I'm certainly very, very, very excited to look forward to spending more time with you guys, and do avail yourself, to the tutors that are here to help you. We have selected tutors, who share, all these values of Morningside College, and are willing, to dedicate time, to spend with the students. Don't be bashful, don't be shy. I talked to some of you, some of you are more outgoing than others, but come out of yourself. This is a community. We're a family. There's nothing to be afraid. And I think that will make sure that you get the most of your next 4 years being in psychology. Thank you.